So advice from the hive mind and some advanced Tyranid tactics. Hi guys, Aceface back with another video for you, and today we're going to talk about advanced Tyranid tactics. So hopefully you've seen my original Tyranid tactics stroke review of the index that dropped back in end of June, beginning of July, where I went through the units briefly, just touched on what I thought my initial ideas of them and my experience with them so far, but mainly it was just an overall review. Now this is the first in a 3-part series around some advanced Tyranid tactics, and the tactics are coming from the index but also from the Forge World Imperial Armour book as well. So all the units I'll be quoting will be from one of those two books, and we'll be talking about them in depth. I'm going to be homing in on the units that are going to be really useful to you. This is a competitive series of videos, so not necessarily for everybody, but it will give you a really good idea of what units to use, what units to invest in, and what units are going to be really effective on the battlefield. So in this first video I'm going to talk about shooting Tyranids and about how to build a competitive list around shooting Tyranids, and what the things to worry about, the things to be concerned about building a list in this way, the core parts of this list, the things that you don't want to be missing out on buying and don't want to be missing out on investing in your list, and the things that you don't need to worry about so much. Okay, so when we talk about Tyranid shooting units, we now have quite a few. In the last edition we had the Flying Hive Tyrant with the Twin-Link Devourers, and to be honest with you, that was about it. A few people took the Barbed Hierodule. He gave you quite a lot of shooting as well. The Carnifexes with the Devourers. Few people still took the Devil Gaunts, which is the Termagants with Devourers, lots of shots, and they try to drop them in. It's an old tactic, but still people liked that tactic as well. And the Exocrine with Biovores also still worked. So some of those units are still in and they work in the same way. Some of them work very, very differently, and we're going to go over them. So what to think about? Well, before you start to talk about those shooting units, you need to build what you call a core, and this core is going to come into every single one of these lists, and we're talking about building a competitive army. I stress this because you might not want to build your army in this way, but I'm telling you how, points for points, to build this army in the most effective, efficient way. And the best way to build a core within a Tyranid army is with Termagants and a Tervagan, and the reason why you do that is because the Tervagan is a very resilient choice within itself. It has toughness 8, it has 14 wounds, it's fairly resilient with a 3-up save, but what it really does is it means it guarantees you 10 of those gaunts that you've purchased in that unit will be coming back every turn unless you lose the whole unit. So you purchase yourself a unit of 30, you always want to be maxing out that unit. You take the unit of 30, and then every time 10 of those gaunts die, or however many, that Tervagan's going to top that up to the initial size of that unit being 30. And obviously that unit has to only just be flesh borers for the Tervagan to be able to use it on there. So you can have Devil Gaunts in there, you can have Spine Fists, but the flesh borers are the only gun option that can be regenerated by the Tervagan. So you want to take one of those absolutely for certain. If you want to make your core that little bit more resilient, you double that up. So you take 2 Tervagans, you take 2 Broods, 30 Gaunts. And what that means is it means that 2 of those Tervagans can potentially work on one unit. So if you lose 20 troops from one unit, 2 Tervagants can top that back up to the initial size. What that then does is that makes that part of your army very reliable and very, very good at kind of sitting there in the core. Then on top of that, what you want to add to it is 1, if not 2 Malanthropes. And for those of you who haven't used or know about Malanthropes, they are somewhat changed from the 7th edition version, but still have the same core values and the way that they work. And with that, what happens is any unit within 3 inches of that Malanthrope, the enemy that's shooting at them gets a -1 to hit. So they have to roll an extra 1. So if they had to roll 3s, now they have to roll 4s. And that is any unit within 3 inches of that Malanthrope. So if you can imagine, those gaunts are potentially sitting in the front. There's 30 of them. They're being regenerated. Now you have a Malanthrope that is also making it harder to get rid of those gaunts. That is your core. You can do different variations of that. You can cut down the numbers slightly of termagants if you have to. You can potentially lose 1 of your big tervagants. You can potentially lose 1 of your Malanthropes. But that gives you the core of your list. That sits there. That scores you your objectives. It has your objective secure part in your termagants. And it has a resilient part within your Tervagan. So it's a very, very good body of your army. Now, I wanted to talk about that in detail because that core can be very much transferred into more or less every single one of your lists. That's the great thing about it. So it's probably the most important part of building that competitive part of your army. And it's not the only way to build a competitive army in Tyranids, but it's the way that I would strongly recommend, and probably your best investment that you know will pretty much give you those points back. It gives you an awesome bubble wrap. It also gives you a troop choice that's going to score you those objectives. So you've got your core in place, you've got your resilience, you've got your scoring part of your army. Now we're going to talk about shooting. We're not going to talk particularly about specific lists. I will probably do a video separate about just what I would recommend for a list. In this video we're going to very much talk about list styles, and that makes a big difference because, for instance, if you were making a battalion, we talked about 2 units of termagants, you have to think of another troop choice in there, and we're not going to cover that today. But now we're going to talk about shooting units, and when you're talking about shooting units you do have quite a good selection now. So you still have the Flyrants with they are Death Spitters with Slimer Worms or whatever they might be. I can never remember the name of them, but basically the replacement to the Devourer is in place. That's one way of doing it. It does give you speed, you can get up nice and quickly, it gives you quite a lot of shots, and it's pretty accurate. So that's one way to go with it. You then have the Tyrannifex. Now the Tyrannifex has got much better than it was in the last edition, and the Tyrannifex you can pretty much build in a couple of different ways. You can build him with a nice flamer with the acid spray. It's not too bad. I don't think it's your best option just because it's going to mean you need to be quite aggressive and quite offensive. The Nid shooting list doesn't really work very well as an offensive shooting list. It works much better as quite a static gun line with, I've got flies flying around my face. It works much better as a static gun line with that core of your troops going out and scoring you your objectives. Bloody flying here. Sorry. That's where it becomes really, really important and key. So the 2 recommendations for the Tyrannifex is either you take the Rupture Cannon or you take the Flesh Borer Hives. And the Flesh Borer Hives are probably your better option, but the Rupture Cannon is also really worth covering, and we'll talk about them both. So the Flesh Borer Hives, the reason why they are so good is because the Tyrannifex has a rule where if he stands still he can shoot his guns twice. Now the Flesh Borer Hives are 20 shots. So suddenly you're shooting 40 shots. So that's very, very powerful. The range is quite short, so you still need to get forward somehow. So you need to kind of get up into the middle of the board so you're in a good threat range, and then you stay still, which can be problematic at times, which is why I wouldn't put it necessarily at the top of my list, but it's still a very, very good option. The rupture cannon has got the much longer range, and it has another special rule where basically if you manage to hit both of the shots, so it's a 2-shot weapon, if both of them hit, the profile gets so much better and so much more aggressive. And that's where your command points come in. So you would end up making sure that you save that command point each turn to make sure that you get that higher profile. And I'll just quickly go to the page where I can cover that gun, because it's really worth noting the difference between the two profiles, because the change they make is so dramatic. It means that it is a really, really key part of it. So as I scan through it to try and find it, we have it. Okay, so it goes from being strength 10, -1 AP and 2 damage. So, but if both of the hits, the AP goes to -4, and the damage is D6, which is incredibly, incredibly powerful. So he starts off by hitting on a 4, which means that you've only got a 50-50 chance. So statistically, you should probably only get one of those hits, which means it's quite hard to generate that special ability. But by keeping that reroll to use it, it suddenly becomes a lot better of a chance for that to get off. And when that gets off, it's really going to pop that thing you're after. So it's one not to be completely dismissed. I think the rupture cannon definitely has its place, but it's still not as efficient as some of the options. Now the next option I want to talk about is about the X-Crine. Now the X-Crine is the one that everybody's probably shouting about the most, and for good reason. It's an awesome, awesome unit. And multiple X-Crines is a high recommendation for the real threat coming out of this list. So you probably want to be looking for your gun Tyranid list to have at least 2 X-Crines in that list. Potentially 3, but you're probably looking at 2 as the best kind of number, because you'll want to add some of the other shooting units that we'll go over in a second. And bearing in mind, majority of these shooting units sit within the heavy slots, so even if we go for the heavy detachment, you're going to run out of space eventually, so which is why it's important to make that choice correct and make sure you've got the right kind of guns in your list. So the X-Crine's gun, the Bioplasma Cannon, it's got 6 shots, it's 36 inches, much better range than it was in the last edition, which means that on a lot of deployments you've got a very good chance of getting a lot of first round shooting in, which is so important. You need to be putting in the damage immediately, and 36 will do that. And the idea of the Tyranid shooting army is you've got lots of different guns all along your back line, and you're meaning that even if you can't necessarily shoot the target that your enemy is really positioned far enough away, then you'll have other targets to shoot, because they won't be able to keep everything out of range of all your guns. And that's a great tactic, because you start to then push the pressure onto your opponent before you've even started. If you can force his deployment to deploy in a certain way, you're already on the front foot, and the X-Crine will very much make an opponent think like that, because of the damage that it's capable of doing. So normally it has 6 shots, but if it stands still, it suddenly has 12 shots, or it can shoot at six shots at 2 different targets, which is incredible because they're different sets of shooting. On top of that, he gets +1 to hit, so he goes from hitting on 4s to hitting on 3s, so he becomes very, very accurate. And his shooting itself is strength 7, it's AP -3, and each one does damage 2. So you've got a great chance of really killing an awful lot. And at that sort of strength 7 with 12 shots at -2, you're then looking at a unit that can do some real damage against some heavy hitting stuff, but also can absolutely annihilate your elite troops. So things like Space Marines are going to despise this gun. It's so good for that. The other thing to always consider with the Exocrine is that it's toughness 8. Toughness 8 is a real magic number in 40k. Toughness 8 is generally meaning that most things are hitting it either on 5s, or the tough stuff, the strong stuff, is generally hitting it on 4s. There's very little things that are strength 9 in the game that will hit it on 3s. So that's great. As soon as you go to toughness 7, there's a lot more things that are wounding it on 4s rather than 5s. So the Exocrine becomes very resilient through that. Very, very resilient. So that's your Exocrine, and as I said, I would recommend 2 of them in your competitive list. Absolutely. Now moving on to the next unit, and we're going to stay in the heavy supports, and that is the Biovore. And the Biovore is an interesting one, a very tricksy unit that can be used in lots and lots of different ways, and we'll go through that. And this is a very key unit to your shooting army, because this will actually protect you as well, and this will slow down your opponent. And the reason why is because of its spore mines. So the Biovore shoots a range of 48, it's heavy 1, so you have a unit of 3 of them, they're all shooting 1 shot each, which you might say is not that great, and they're a very different type of unit from what they used to be. Obviously they used to be all about inflicting lots and lots of wounds on big units with big pie plates. They're not, they're now about mortal wound damage on elite units. Excuse me. And also with the Biovore, because of the FAQ, they don't need line of sight, which is always as they should have been. So you can hide these guys pretty effectively. So you hide them, and then they're shooting out these mortal wounds. But there's a trick to these guys. So the profile itself of the gun, 48 inches, 1 shot. If you hit, then you roll a dice afterwards. They hit on a 4. But, so if they've hit, you roll a dice. Anything but a 1, they do a mortal wound off the target. If you roll a 6, they do D3 mortal wounds off the target, which is really, really good, because majority of things don't get a save against mortal wounds. So even things with a good invuln are still going to be very scared of a Biovore shooting at them, which is awesome. Now, if they miss, and I'll read it out because it is quite confusing. Each time a spore mine launcher misses its target, set up a single spore mine model anywhere within 6 inches of the target unit and more than 3 inches from any enemy model. If the spore mine can't be placed, it is destroyed. This then follows the rules of spore mines. And when you look at the rules of spore mines, they don't cost any points, so they don't cost reinforcement points if you purchase them with a gun. So basically, if you're using a Biovore, they're free. If you purchase them on their own, obviously they're points. So what you can do with these guys is you can almost make them miss, you know. They're a heavy weapon, so you move them to get -1, so then they're hitting on 5, so you've got a good chance of missing. And what you can do, particularly if you've got 3, maybe 4 units of these guys, you can actually put up a wall of spore mines. And yes, a wall of spore mines won't last very long, they'll hammer through them. But you've got to bear in mind they're all individual units, and things like smite must target the closest unit. So smite spam is a big thing at the moment. If you've got a wall of spore mines, you're going to soak up that smite, you're going to restrict your movement of your opponent, and you're really going to hamper him. That then allows the rest of your shooting armies to absolutely annihilate him as he comes up and he's stuck behind your spore mines, or he's stuck shooting, smiting, assaulting these spore mines. And if he leaves them, they're close to him, they're gonna detonate, and they're gonna cause mortal wounds anyway, because that's what happens later on. So they're a really solid unit, and they're very, very cheap. Very, very cheap. So 2 units of these would be a great addition to a shooting Tyranid list, 100%. We go on to the next unit that I'm going to highlight, and the next unit is the Hive Guard. Now the Hive Guard are very, very good. Very, very good. And again, very points efficient. So they don't cost a lot of points, and they do an awful lot of damage. So the Hive Guard, they hit on 3s again, and they have 2 shots each. So with 2 shots, they're strength 8. Now strength 8 again, we spoke about that magic number. So strength 8 and particularly strength 9 in 8th edition really are key numbers, because on average things tend to be strength, toughness 7 or lower. So having strength 8 or strength 9 suddenly gives you much better odds of doing damage. So it's a really key number. So we talked about the X-Crime before. Having a strength 7 weapon means that it's great against medium and light. It's okay against heavy. It will still do damage and it will still make things like knights worried. But strength 8 is the kind of the magic. That's the magic stuff, and particularly above that. So having a strength 8 weapon is really effective. It's 36 inches. Again, really good distance, really good distance, and it doesn't need line of sight. It also, you don't get any cover against it as well, so that's not a bad thing. Cover is not so important anymore, but it's still a pretty good rule. So, it's -2 AP, and it is D3 damage. So D3 damage is not quite as good as the X-Crimes 2, because, you know, that kind of, on average, it probably weigh itself out, but the reliability of 2 is better than a D3, in my opinion. But the AP -2 is great, and the fact that they are hitting on 3s means they're very accurate. They're also quite small models, so you can hide them quite well, and they're very reasonably pointed. So another one. The good thing with Hive Guard is they're in the elite slot. So when we talked about packing in that heavy support, you can then take Hive Guard as well into your elite, which doesn't then impact on your heavy. So you can kind of see where we're going with that, and you can start to see as we're building up this list. And they by far are your star performers. I'm going to talk a little bit about your support shooter units, because they're ones definitely to consider. They will provide a slightly different role on the battlefield, but are also ones not to discount. So, and they are, let's start off with the Gaunts. So the Devil Gaunts, a classic Tyranid unit, 3 shots, strength 4, hitting on 4s, not terrible. With these you need to have them in some sort of transport, so they need to be coming up in a Trigon, and in this style list the Trigon factor doesn't really fit. We'll talk more about the Trigon factor in later videos, because the Trigons are a key part of other types of lists, but in the shooting Tyranid army they don't fit in as well. So much more likely to be sitting in a pod, these guys. But a lot of shots, and relatively cheap, so they'll do a job, and they're great at killing that you know, the chaff, to potentially then allow you to shoot at the bigger stuff. So yeah, so they are definitely a good solid choice. Some other shooting units to consider are your Raveners. So the Raveners, very good. Now with the Raveners you want to take Death Spitters. Death Spitters have got much better. They're still strength 5, they've always been strength 5, but they're now -1 AP. So just that -1, the fact that they're 3 shots, you're just going to make them make quite a lot of saves. Now they only hit on 4s, which is not as good, but you can pop these guys up, so they can have been burrowing, they can pop up, and that's a lot of heavy bolter shots that they're going to put into the enemy. So a really solid unit. So, but again, a support one. They're not your heavy lifters, but they're a decent unit. And a couple of other units to go over that are also worth considering, and a lot of this, you know, is points is one of the things that make things so good, and harpies incredibly cheap. And what you can put on a harpy is you can put a double Strangleform cannon. Now the Strangleform cannon is assault d6, it's strength 7, -1 AP, and it is 2 damage, which is really good. And you can add one to hit roll when attacking a unit that has got more than 10, and that gets very good, because normally it hits on a 4, so suddenly you're hitting on a 3 with 2 lots of d6 shots. That's really good. At strength 7, again, very effective, and they're very cheap. They're also quick, so you can move around the board, you can cap objectives, you can cause a lot of grief with harpies. They're a very good unit. The problem that you're going to come up with harpies is if you're not running with other things like hive tyrants, then potentially they're going to fall out of synapse and they're going to have to target the closest enemy, which is always a bit of a pain. A lot of the units that we've covered previously also suffer from the same problem, but if you're playing a gun style Tyranid list, you're going to be with stuff like Malanthropes, Tervagants that are protecting you. They're also going to give you a synapse to make sure you can shoot at whatever you want. So that's one of the things with the harpies. And then the last unit that I'm going to cover is a funny old one. It is the Tyrannocytes. The Tyrannocyte is your pod, but the Tyrannocyte does a lot of shooting. A lot of shooting. So bear in mind it has 5 guns. You can choose between the Death Splitter that we spoke about previous, which is not a bad option. That -1 AP is not to be sneered at. And a fair few shots, 3 shots from each of them. So that's a lot of shots it's kicking out. It's obviously only going to hit on 5s, but you know, there you go, you got a lot of shots. Or you have the Venom Cannon. Now the Venom Cannon is D3 shots from each gun, so you can see already that's quite a lot of shots. It's strength 8, which as we've spoken about is the magic number. It has the -1 and it does 1 damage. That's not bad as well. It's really not a bad option. I hated Venom Cannons in the previous edition. They're actually a very effective weapon now. But my personal favourite is the Barb Strangler. The Barb Strangler is assault d6, so you've got 5 lots of d6 shots. It's strength 5, it's -1, damage 1, and that is great for killing chaff. Really good. You know, if you're having to transport something like your gaunts, then why not? Let's have them in a Barb Strangler pod, putting out a lot more shooting as well. So they're your kind of shooting units. They're the ones you want to be keeping. These are the ones you want to be putting in. And as I said, we're not talking about points. We're not talking about exactly how to build a list. I'm going to let you do that, and we'll do later videos on creating a list. But one thing to go away and have a think about how you build this list is just have a little think about your key factors. So you've got your base, which is your Tervagants, your Malanthropes. So you know, let's do a battalion formation, for instance. So let's take two Tervagants, let's take a Malanthrope. That's giving you a HQ section. Now we're going to take 2 lots of 30 gaunts. There's your troops. We need 1 more troop. So let's just take some rippers for now. The cheapest way to bring it in is just chuck some rippers in. And now we want to pay for shooting. So we've got our objective grabbers, we've got a bit of psychic ability, we've got a bit of resilience, and we've got our synapse. But now we want to talk about getting in some shooting army. So let's go for 2 exocrines. We'll have 2 exocrines in there. We've got a nice kind of build there. The formation of the army is looking good. We'll have a couple of exocrines. We'll then go for 3 lots of 3 Hive Guard. Again, loads of shooting in there. And then what we'll do is we'll finish it off with a unit of Biovores. So Biovores are going to go in there. And you're going to see how that kind of looks. And that is an awful lot of shooting. You've got a load of shooting coming from the Hive Guard. You've got a load of shooting coming from the Exocrine. You've got your body of troops which are going to hold those objectives down. And then what you can do is then anything else you can have a look at adding some extra factors in there. So you can add you know, potentially you want to go for like your command. So you want to go, maybe let's get yourself a hive tyrant or a couple of hive tyrants with some wings. You know, they can go up, do some irritating. Maybe you go for a Malanthrope, chuck another Malanthrope in there, gives you a little bit more resilience. Maybe you stick in some warriors, some Tyranid warriors, again just to give you some support in the back line, making sure that you've got that synapse and holding that in place. But that gives you a really strong shooting army. And with that bubble wrap from the Gaunts, which is the way you play it, so you start off, as I said, it's a very static army, but actually it's a very powerful army. So you have your 2 Tervigans, you have your big bubble wrap of your Gaunts, which is making sure that it's going around all of your shooter units, keeping them all safe, making sure nothing can assault them very easily. You've got your Tervigans in there that are continually regenerating them as they slowly go forward and take objectives. You've got the Malanthropes making it hard to do any damage to them, and then behind them anything that gets within 36 inches. And that gives you your build. So you've got there a really solid competitive army that is ultimately going to be very difficult to deal with. It's going to put out an awful lot of shots, it's going to frustrate, and if you play it right, will at the right time be able to get up and seize those objectives. It's an army that potentially can play first or second because you have enough bubble wrap there to defend against the Alpha Strike, and because the Malanthropes is very difficult to target and to do damage to. So it's a very effective army, and it's one then you can play around with. You can take pieces in and out to make it more and more effective. So hopefully guys you've enjoyed that, and do come back when we'll talk about the next Tyranid build in this advanced Tyranid tactics series. Thanks for watching guys, I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.